welcome to the Snoqualmie Tribe, a brief history of the Lake Sammamish area with Stephen Moses. I'm Holly Turner, the host for today's program. Also with me is Program Committee member Margie Rockenbach. She'll be helping me monitor the chat today and will lead a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. To submit a question or comment during the presentation today, just click chat at the bottom of your screen to open the chat window. You can then select who you'd like to send the message to by clicking on the drop down next to "To," and then just type your message and press enter to send it. We'd love to know how you heard about this program and who's listening with you today, so you can let us know in the chat box now. Now, unfortunately, Board President John Ofterow is not able to join us today, but he has pre-recorded a few words about the Society that I'll share with you now.
Good morning and thanks for tuning in. Before we get started today, I thought it would be a good idea to update you a little bit about our society activities over the last number of months. So you probably know we've been out of the schoolhouse since 2018, and we eventually were able to move back in there in March of this year. And since then, Holly and her team of volunteers have been working hard to reestablish our office, our collections area, and develop some incredible areas of displays and exhibits to show off our collection of Redmond's history. So I would love to invite you back in there soon, but unfortunately that's not going to be until at least early 2022 with the pandemic still rearing out there. Our subject today came to me actually months ago, maybe a year ago, when I happened to be on the City of Redmond website and discovered the Bear Creek site. And it was an incredible collection of activity that happened after 2008. And as a result of planning some restoration of Bear Creek, where it flowed into the Sammamish River, they discovered artifacts that went back over 13,000 years. And as a result of that, there were many agencies that were contacted and so forth. And there was quite a series of reports that happened at the city and recorded in 2018. And I dove into that, discovered some really incredible history, especially noting that Stephen Moses might be an incredible speaker for us as the archaeologist from the Snoqualmie Tribe. So we got a hold of Stephen. He agreed to do this, and so here's a little bit about him. He's the Director of Archaeology and Historic Preservation for the Snoqualmie Tribe and comes to us with a vast experience of cultural activities for his tribe since 2012. He reviews and comments on approximately 100 projects a week that may affect culturally significant sites and monitors archaeological fieldwork. In doing this, he coordinates meetings between the Snoqualmie Tribe and over 20 federal agencies, 17 state agencies, other Native American tribes, and dozens of local jurisdictions regarding the protection of cultural resources. In leading intertribal discussions about reparations, sacred site protection, cultural resource protection, and many other issues, Stephen has coordinated meetings with 12 to 15 tribes in Western Washington, fostering relationships without politics being involved. Meanwhile, he provides outreach to the public and to tribal members concerning tribal history and culture. Stephen grew up in Redmond and attended school on Rose Hill and is a Lake Washington High School graduate. Stephen is an Air Force veteran and is now pursuing a degree in business, IT management, and information from Western Governors University. Before we welcome Stephen, the Society would like to acknowledge that we occupy the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Snoqualmie, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Tulalip, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Sauk-Suattle tribes. We see you. We respect your right to sovereignty and self-determination. We are committed to being better listeners, learners, and lifting Indigenous voices. Please welcome Stephen to our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you for coming this morning, Stephen, and we're ready for your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Give me just a moment. pull up my PowerPoint. Doo-doo. So, as mentioned, I'm Stephen Moses, the Director of Archaeology and Preservation for the Snoqualmie Tribe and a Snoqualmie tribal member. I've been doing cultural resource protection for the tribe in some capacity since 2005. I've been managing the program since 2012, and I have a staff of 3 that help us do that. And like I say, we're protecting our past to protect our future. The work that we do is to protect and preserve a resource that is absolutely non-renewable. Once a cultural resource and archaeological site is exposed and researched, that is damage to the site. So you can get information from the site, but the resource itself is forever changed. It cannot be put back in that condition. So my job is to make sure that that is only done as a last resort. We want to protect and preserve as much as we can. It's the legacy of my ancestors that I'm trying to protect, so my grandchildren know who they are and where they came from. So Stephen Moses Snoqualmie. Hello, friends. I'm Stephen Moses, member of the Snoqualmie Tribe and the Director for Archaeology and Historic Preservation. My family has lived along the shores and lakes of rivers in Issaquah and Lake Sammamish since time immemorial. So in this picture here, we have Hatcha Blue, or Mary Louie. She was born in 1794, died in 1918, and lived along the shore of Lake Sammamish most of her life. She lived to be about 124 years old. She's my great-great-great-grandmother. She was a midwife to a lot of the early settlers around Lake Sammamish. So if you're familiar with a little bit of the history of Issaquah, there's the Pickerings, there's the Gilmans. She helped bring that first generation into this world. So I'm going to start with a brief story of who we are, who the Snoqualmie people are. So this is a brief retelling of, we call it our creation story, or the 2 sisters return. Once there were 2 sisters who went to Baquab to dig fern roots. When they were done, they decided to sleep there for the night. That night, they were looking up into the sky and admiring a red star and a white star. When they fell asleep, they were taken to the land of the sky people. And Baquab is a village site that's in North Bend. It's the Meadowbrook Tollgate Prairie area. When they woke up, they saw that they were married to the 2 stars they had been looking at. Every day, the men went out to hunt, and the sisters stayed home and dug fern roots. One day, the older sister became pregnant and gave birth to a boy named Snoqualmie. After a while, the sisters missed their home and family. One day, while digging for roots, they realized if they dug far enough, they could see the world below. They decided they could go home this way. One sister would dig while the other would watch baby Snoqualmie and weave a cedar rope. Eventually, the rope reached the top of Culps, which is Mount Si. And if you look at the beadwork on the left, you can see the red star, the white star. You can see Culps and the 2 sisters.
Huh? What?
And here's my daughter, Skyla. She loves the story.
Let me get it.
So it brought her in.
Why didn't you tell me you were?
Hold on. I'm talking to people.
How dare you?
Behave. The sisters climbed down to the earth. Everyone was happy that the sisters had returned and were surprised to see Snoqualmie. To celebrate, the sisters made their ladder into a swing. Everyone swung from Culps to Hatchabutts until Rat became jealous and chewed the rope. Udowad, the swing, is still at the spot it fell. So Culps, again, it's Mount Si. and the swing would go over to Rattlesnake Ridge, which is Tkatchabuts, which in our language refers to footprints. If you look on Rattlesnake Mountain, you can see what looks like footprints where people would push off from it. And Idoad, the swing, when it fell to the ground, it turned to a
Stone rock.
yes, a stone rock that was halfway between North Bend and Snoqualmie. It's been mined for gravel for about 30-ish years. So there's not much of that rock left. Well, all their family was celebrating. I came and stole the baby. Everyone tried to find him, but it was Sky Kai who was able to find Snoqualmie, who was now grown up. He told Sky Kai he would come home when his children were grown. And Kai is a dog salmon, and Sky Kai is blue jay or Stellar's jay.
Blue jay.
When Snoqualmie returned, he had a special power. He could transform things. He was now Dokwabath. He changed everything into what it is today. When he came to the great fish weir near where he had been
turned into a moon.
stolen as a baby, he turned into a large waterfall. Skathdath.
No, he turned into the moon.
Well, not quite yet. And that fish weir became Snoqualmie Falls. From there, Dokuwath created the various people in all the rivers as they are now. He placed all of the fish in the rivers and made the wild game good to eat.
Can I do it?
No,
I want to turn pages.
no, Skylar, no.
Hmm.
So, Snoqualmie to Dokwabath. We are Snoqualmie, people of the moon. We are descendants of Snoqualmie to Dokwabath. We have lived, hunted, and fished this area for as long as the earth and rivers remember. We are still here today, caring for the land, the water, the fish, and game that Dokwabath gave us. Skylar, watch out, kiddo. So we are the people of Moon the Transformer. We signed the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1855, and our traditional territory spanned most of Western Washington and the mountain passes. So we had village sites essentially from about the Auburn area up to Everett and across the lakes. Skylar. We had village sites and locations still used as towns today. Examples are Falls City, Carnation, North Bend, Redmond, Issaquah, and Sammamish. Most modern tribal members still live in the area, but some live all over the US and Canada. I have cousins that live in Arkansas. My wife has cousins up in British Columbia. And we have family all over the Northwest. Our reservation is in Snoqualmie. If you've been to the casino, the Snoqualmie Casino, that's our reservation. That is the only reservation we have, and it's only used for the gas station and for the casino. We actually purchased the land ourselves and built the casino ourselves. Basically, think of it as a $330 million mortgage. We also own multiple pieces of land all over King County. We have property in Covington, Falls City, Carnation, Snoqualmie, North Bend. But we have been here since time immemorial. But how long is time immemorial? So if we look at the boxes here, Washington became the 42nd state in 1889. That was about 125-ish years ago. The Treaty of Point Elliott was signed in 1855 by the United States and several tribes in Washington over 160 years ago. The U.S. Constitution was signed in 1776, over 230 years ago. One of the first Europeans to touch soil in the New World in 1492 was over 500 years ago. The Great Pyramid in Egypt was constructed about 4,000 years ago. And the oldest form of writing was first used about 5,000 years ago. But is that time immemorial? According to archaeology, the oldest sites in the area, the sites at Tolt, Falls City, and Snoqualmie are at least 4,000 to 8,000 years old. Sites along the Sammamish River and Lake Sammamish are at least 10,000 years old. One site is close to 13,000 years old. We have been living in this area for longer than written words have existed, and that is time immemorial. And one of the things that people always are curious about, is there an archaeological site near me? Or is there a native village? Or is my house on an old Indian burial ground? My answer to that question is always yes. We've been in this area for 13,000 years. We've lived all over the area. Just driving from one town to the other, you're crossing multiple archaeological sites, whether you know it or not.
Cookie.
No, those are fire modified rocks.
I thought they were cookies.
They're not cookies.
They look like brownies. What?
They do look like brownies.
Do you have any
Again,
paper?
sorry. No, Skylar. Sorry again. Well, I don't. I never apologize for children being a part of learning history. Plus, she's just adorable. We have a connection to the land that no one else has, and our ancestors left us in charge of protecting it. So now I'm going to talk a little language. Our traditional language is called Lushootseed or Lushootseed. So Snoqualmie Tribe. That's Issaquah and Sammamish. Both Squaw and Issaquah derived from a mishearing of the Snoqualmie village site named Squaw. It's located at the south end of the lake. The name Sammamish is derived from the word Tsab, referring to the river at the north end of the lake. The modern words are a corruption of the language and misunderstanding of how people identify themselves. It is common practice to identify oneself as being from a certain location first and a larger group second. For example, I am from Issaquah, Washington, the United States. People from the lake area would say that they are Sabapsh or Squackapsh, the latter being the name of the river above the lake and the former the name of the lake, and Apsh meaning people from. The two words got misheard by the non-Lushootseed speakers and became corrupted to Sammamish and Issaquah.
Trying to hang on as tight as I can.
So this is a new slide to the presentation that's not as fancy as the other ones. But as was mentioned, the 13,000-year-old site is in Redmond. Cobal is the name for Bear Creek and loosely the southeastern part of Redmond. So you can think of like the Avondale area by UPS, Target, the old cemetery. So the Bear Creek site was carbon dated to about 13,000 years old. And the resources that were found there, the hundreds of artifacts were found in a layer of peat moss and right on top of the glacier soil. So the glacier soil is the remnants of when the glaciers from the Ice Age receded and they scraped away
Someone pooped on the
much
box.
everything underneath them. So there's not much archaeological resources that are under the glacier. The discovery of the site came about through a project that was being done by the Washington Department of Transportation, United States Army Corps of Engineers, the city of Redmond. They needed to rechannel Bear Creek next between Marymore and Redmond Town Center. So fish would use the creek again. The creek was originally straightened and damaged through the construction of the 520 highway. So WashDOT was involved as part of the mitigation for the damage that they did. So when they created the new channel for the creek, that's when they discovered the site. At that time, they didn't know how old the site was, but it was a site that multiple tribes had told the state and the city that you're going to find items at the site. So this was a great example of how a restoration project for ecological and habitat benefit had a direct impact on cultural resources. So there was a long conversation about how to mitigate the damages to this very old archaeological site. It resulted in a memorandum of agreement between the Army Corps, the city, 5 different tribes on the limits of the new channel and where the plantings and such were and how much of the site was going to be protected and preserved. The big thing to consider with the site in Bear Creek, as many of you know, Mary Moore, right across 520, has multiple archaeological sites, both historic and prehistoric. And all of these archaeological sites are loosely connected as a larger community through the Puget Sound area. I like to tell people that when you think about the indigenous villages in the past, they're very much like the towns today. You know, you have the town, you have the outskirts, and things just sort of merge into other towns. That's how our villages were. You know, we didn't have hard set boundaries. And so this large complex of longhouses, which, you know, an average longhouse would be, 60, 65 feet wide, could be 80 to 100 feet long, that multiple families, and there'd be lots of structures associated with the longhouse for food processing, for traditional practices. And so there are hundreds and hundreds of these houses along the various lakes and creeks and rivers all over the area. But one thing that's important to remember is that Snoqualmie are still here. We have multiple tribal businesses such as the Snoqualmie Casino, the Crescent Market, the Sailor's Lodge and Spa, and 8th Generation that help support our community members with services such as housing assistance, education assistance, veterans assistance, and more. So all of our businesses are geared towards providing help to the tribal community in many different facets, whether it's helping low-income tribal members, helping children of tribal members to get school supplies or baby supplies for new parents, or help going to college, or even some sort of technical training. All those businesses are geared towards helping out the people. Our Environmental and Natural Resources Department has played key roles in habitat restoration all over King County, including the arrival of the kokanee along Lake Sammamish. And we partner with many, many community organizations to help make the quality of life better for everyone. We have a long history in the area, but our history for the past 150 years has obviously been shared with other cultures, not just the Euro-American, but there's individuals from all over the world that have made Redmond area and Lake Sammamish their home. And we welcome them here, and we want to make this whole area a beautiful quality place for everyone, which is partly why a few months ago, when we had a surplus of the COVID vaccine, we offered vaccinations to the public, essentially anyone in King, Snoqualmie, and Pierce County, as a way of expressing how we're all in not just the pandemic together, but we're all in this area together, sharing our lives, sharing our history, moving into the future. Adop Shala. That means thank you, everyone. So we have just a few pictures here. Up in the top left, this is a part of a picture of a war club that was found in Falls City. In the middle picture, we have a projectile point that was actually found in Issaquah. Then we have a dance mask that was used for our dance troupe in the late 80s. And then below it, we have my beautiful daughter, whom you've all seen and heard, singing in front of Mount Si. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to entertain whatever questions are out there.
Thank you so much, Steve. This is so interesting. We have an amazing attendance today from a huge variety of places, and there have been so many questions and everything. I've been keeping track of it, and I'll try to get as many in as we can. I feel especially happy to have you here at Indigenous Peoples Day weekend. I didn't even realize that that was going to be happening. So right now, we're in Redmond and we really treasure our local history. And as we have you here, could you talk a little more about the Redmond area in general or close to it? The local cultural resources that you are working to protect, what are they? Besides the sites.
No, I think as I mentioned, there's the Bear Creek site, there's the Merrimore site, there's multiple other sites up and down Avondale Novelty Hill Road. Of course, there are sites all along West Lake Sammamish Road. Some sites are known publicly, some are listed, some are known by the tribe, and we don't really share the information about them to protect them. A big chunk of my job is reviewing up to over 4,000 development projects a year for anything that may have an impact on a sensitive site. So Redmond is, for lack of a better term, kind of a hotbed of cultural importance to multiple tribes. And so out of the everything that happened at the Bear Creek site and through the MOA, the city of Redmond created a cultural resource management plan through their city administration, approved by the city council, that spells out areas of potential archaeological and cultural concerns within the city. And the city has protocols in place to reach out to the tribes to solicit our advice on those sites. So going back to, I said during the presentation, basically everywhere, given the amount of time. Even though there's been a considerable amount of change, and for those that have lived in Redmond, I consider Redmond my hometown. And I went to Rose Hill Elementary, went to Lake Washington High School, had friends that went to Redmond High School. That was all in the mid 90s, and Redmond has grown. I can't even tell you how much since then, but that doesn't diminish the cultural significance of any of the archaeological resources that are there. Sites that are important to have cultural significance are important no matter what is done to the land.
In particular, we had a question about the location of any longhouses in the Redmond or Lake Sammamish area. That beautiful map that you showed at the beginning of with the lake on it, Lake Sammamish, I noticed some things that look like they might be longhouses. Is that what the location of the longhouses?
Not exact locations. Obviously, that's information that we want to protect. I will say there were hundreds and hundreds of longhouses. They weren't necessarily distinct villages. They were part of larger village complexes, just like how humans have created settlements all over the world. Things aren't just in these tiny little compartmentalized pockets. But there were, I guess a good way to think about it, near the mouth of creeks along, the hills by rivers and lakes, there's a good chance that there have been a group of houses. You're not going to find really many remnants of those houses. For one, they were built out of cedar, and the soils in Washington are very acidic and destroy organic material really in just a couple decades. Plus, almost every single longhouse was burned, and the natives were forced out of the houses in the areas by some of the early settlers. And so, of course, the burning would remove any remnants of anything.
Amazing what they do find, isn't it? Somebody has a question here about what the techniques were for catching or trapping salmon in the Squak River.
Well, rivers, there are a couple ways. A lot of times rivers would have big fish weirs built across them, basically a lattice of poles. And you could fasten nets so fish could swim into the nets, or you would spear them.
Okay. Are there people still fishing like that today?
Well, I can't answer that for sure, but I know there, and not specifically Snoqualmie people, but I know there's Indigenous people that do still fish the traditional ways sometimes.
Okay. Somebody read somewhere that the original name for the Sammamish River was Squak, and that came from the native word meaning swampy. Is that right?
That is not right.
Okay.
That's one of the things that that I try to educate people on. That's why I mentioned the presentation is the word squaw refers to the modern day Squaw Creek and the south end of Lake Sammamish. And that word, it's the name of a location. And not all names, especially old names, have like a specific translatable equivalent.
Okay.
So there's some words or some things that, it's the name of a place. It doesn't necessarily have a romantic translation to anything.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm having to look at some more questions that have come in. Oh my. Okay. Just give me a second. This is impressive here.
There's a lot of questions.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Are there any story times or educational outreach program to teach children about the local tribes?
Well, currently, my department is part of the larger governmental affairs and special projects group within the tribe. And we do have a group of people within that are working with various school districts on the curriculum for teaching Indigenous histories in the area. And we do have some information on the tribal website. And there's a few people within the tribe that do presentations and talks such as this to help do a basic level of education. Okay.
We can find out more, I assume, from you if we want to. Some folks have a question here. Can you tell us more about the many functions of the longhouse? What was it used for? How was it used?
It was for a living. They're just called longhouses because, like I said, they were long. You can think of them kind of like apartments. The houses, an average house would be 80 to 100 feet long, 60 feet wide. You would have families living along the walls with their own separate compartments, and in the middle of the house would be the fire pits. The houses would have big slanted roofs. You would be able to move slats so smoke could go up. The floor of the house would be usually kept with dirt that was cleaned off of debris, or like basically pea gravels, so you could walk and wouldn't press your feet. And each little compartment would be separated by, typically they were rooms that were created by hanging up mats, and the mats could be made out of cedar root. They could be made out of cattail, or sometimes they could be made out of tule from the other side of the mountains. But yeah, no, they were living quarters. Just like, people have houses today, multi-generational families. So you would have, 5 different family groups in one house.
Okay. Okay. There are, there's a group of questions I'm going to try to condense and keep right at the end. Okay. Here we go. You focused on the area more or less between Redmond Town Center and Mary Moore Park, that area. Do your elders tell stories of trails into that area as a natural crossing of the Sammamish River? Is that where people crossed?
Well, there is an extensive trail system all over the Snoqualmie Valley, the Snoqualmie watershed, that connected all of the village sites. And really, I mean, think about it this way: is people have certain things that they look for when they build a community, build a place to live. Access to water, relatively flat space to build. So the places where my ancestors thought were great to live is the same place where the white settlers thought it was a great place to live, and those eventually became the towns. So a lot of the modern towns are built on old village sites, and a lot of the roads, especially in King County, are actually on top of the old trail system that was used by the indigenous peoples.
Okay. You're all going to have to forgive me. We have so many questions here. This is fabulous. Someone notes, Lucille notes that Indians, as she says, used to fish in Lake Sammamish in the fall, and she's not seen them in a while. Are they going to be fishing again in the future, or is that a thing of the past?
Oh, well, no, there is fishing that still happens in the lake. That's fishing, especially tribal fishing, is a very complex, complicated political issue that we're not going to go into right now, but there's still fishing that's done there. It's now, say 99% of the time it's done modernly, not the traditional fishing style, but there's still fishing that happens in Lake Sammamish.
Okie doke. How strongly have the native languages been preserved and taught to kids today?
Frankly, not much. Many tribes, including the Snoqualmie, have language programs to help teach adults, elders, and children the language. Due to the, let's say, chaotic nature of the relationship between the Americans and the native people from the mid to late 1800s until really the 1970s. My mind just blanked out. I'm sorry.
Well, it's okay. This all goes together about the languages. There's a bunch of language questions.
Oh, yes, language. Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm sure many people are familiar with the boarding school system. There's a lot of indigenous kids that were taken to these boarding schools. They were forced into Christianity. They were forced to have their language taken from them, their songs, their cultural practices. Even worse than having that, I'm just, to be blunt about it, that beaten out of them, they decided that they didn't want their kids and grandkids to go through the same level of trauma. So they didn't always teach the language, the cultural traditions to their kids or grandkids. And then as tribes were forced out of a lot of the towns, the city of Seattle had an ordinance that kicked all natives out of Seattle, forcing the Duwamish people out of their main homelands out into the larger area. So a lot of the language was preserved through really early ethnographers, and some of the early settlers. Arthur Ballard is a great example of someone who, grew up with a nanny that was from the Muckle Street Reservation. So he grew up understanding the language and an idea of the culture. And, he essentially is the father of anthropology in Washington. And he wrote a number of journeys. He recorded stories. And there's other people. There's elders like Vi Hilbert, who's from Skagit, who taught at the UW for many years and is able to bring the language back in an academic way. So it's slowly being taught. I myself did not grow up speaking the language. I just learned a little bit here and there growing up. My wife and one of our kids are both much better at the language than I am. And my wife's best friend is actually our language teacher. We do the best that we can with Skyla. So she can speak some of the language, and she can respond. The big thing I do with her is place names. One of my big passions is the traditional name of a location and revitalizing those. So she never calls Mount Si. She always calls it Culps and things like that.
For those of us who want to learn more about this, what are good resources for learning how to pronounce and learn the language? And should non-native speakers try to pronounce it in native ways, or is that considered impolite?
Oh no, I encourage everyone to try. We're all learning together. We can all teach together, and I think it's fantastic for anyone to try to pronounce, to try to learn.
Where can we learn more? What are there some websites?
There's a few websites that I recommend. Again, our website at snoqualmietribe.us has some information. Honestly, one of my favorite sites for language information is the Puyallup Language Program. So just search Puyallup Tribe Language Program. They speak the same dialect of Lushootseed that we do, which is a southern version of the language. Then Tulalip has a really good language website too, and up there it's a different dialect. It's the same language, but it's a different dialect. So think of it as like someone from New York and someone from Atlanta talking. It's the same language, but it's not.
Okay.
I've lived in both those places, so I feel confident saying that.
Okay. One of the traditions we have in our society is we let people tell related stories. And I see one here that I'm going to share to give you just a little rest. Kathy Fankboner tells us, she says, my mother grew up in Carnation in the 30s and family still lives in the area. The home she grew up in is still lived in by her family. It is where the Innick family lives in, not sure of the spelling. She says, she was so proud of the fact that the chief of the Snoqualmie tribe pierced her ears when she was a young girl. Jerry Innick was the chief there then, she said, and Kathy heard this story for her whole life. What can you add to that? I'm thinking this might be a good time to talk about the use of the terms tribe and chief as well.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kathy. Enoch is the last name. Jerry Enoch was a leader of the Snoqualmie people and Indigenous people throughout most of the early 20th century. He passed away in 1954 or 56. But he was very much involved in Indigenous issues for everyone in the area. The concept of, well, I'm going to tie this into a couple things too. We're going to talk about tribal identity, and then individual identities within the tribe, because I saw a couple of questions. I'm talking somewhat about that as well. When we talk about tribal affiliations, the modern tribal affiliations, depending on the tribe, are either a creation by the government because Isaac Stevens, who was the governor during the treaty times, wanted all Native people to move to basically one of 4 reservations. So there was Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Yakima, Colville, that were initially where every Indigenous person in Washington is supposed to go to one of those reservations. So those are all confederations of multiple different groups. And the tribal governments took the name of basically the villages that were there. So Tulalip, the Tulalip tribes are named after the village, Tulalip, on the bay there. Muckleshoot, the prairie that is the village right off the river there. And so other tribes like Snoqualmie, Snoqualmie, Soxuatl stayed in the river basins. And so we have the names that are associated with those rivers. But like I mentioned during the presentation, is almost no one introduces themselves. Well, you introduce yourself and where you're from based on the context of what the other person knows. So if 2 people are from, let's say, Seattle, or we'll use Redmond as an example, why not? So 2 people from Redmond are talking, they know they're from Redmond, so one will say, hey, I'm from Education Hill. And then the other one could say, well, hey, I'm from Rose Hill. So if those same 2 people are talking to someone, let's say they're from Spokane, they're probably just gonna tell someone, because the person from Spokane doesn't know the neighborhoods, so they're gonna say, hey, I'm from the east side, or I'm from maybe Redmond or the greater Seattle area. So if those same people from Redmond are talking to someone who's outside of the state of Washington, let's say they're from Iowa, they're probably just going to say Seattle. If you're talking to someone from another country, and then, it's Washington. So that context of how you identify yourself changes based on your assumptions of what the other person knows about where you're from. I hope that makes sense. So it is possible for, and this is actually how the words Issaquah and Sammamish came about, is, someone lives along the river Tsab. And the suffix opsh means people from. So when you're talking about where you're from, you're going to say you're Sabopsh, saying, I'm from the village along Sab. But you would have that larger affiliation with the group, which in our case would be Snoqualmie. So you have the affiliations are somewhat, they're not complicated, they're not layered, they're different names, different words than what you're used to, but it's the same way everyone identifies themselves and where they're from. So the groups, each of the main village sites would have a head person. It actually could be a male or female, wouldn't matter. They would be the person that would be in charge of the everyday functions of the house. Groups of houses would have councils made up of heads of the houses, and they would have access to a larger group of leaders that would be in charge of bigger groups of villages. And it's those individuals that eventually became what's called chiefs. So the idea of a chief is not real, our idea of a chief, because there's over 500 different indigenous communities in Washington, and not Washington, excuse me, in the United States. We're all different. We all have our different cultures, histories, and concepts. So what is considered a chief for us would not be like the same function of a chief, let's say, for the Chippewa. I don't know if the Chippewa have chiefs, but that sort of concept. And so Jerry Canham, he was part of the Enoch family, was considered a chief and a leader for the Snoqualmie people, who was from the Tolt area, the Carnation area.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. Several people are asking what non-native people in this area can do. What does the Snoqualmie Tribe need from our local governments to protect its interests, to preserve its culture, and just for people in general who live in the Redmond area, how can we support and honor the Snoqualmie Tribe?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I think the best thing you can do is learn. I mean, by participating in things like this from the Redmond Historical Society, educating yourself is the first thing. If you want to be a little more active, I know we have created the Snoqualmie Tribe Ancestral Lands Movement. That it's a Facebook it has sort of the public facing portal of that. The website has some information too, but it talks about recreating. Well, it encourages people to recreate responsibly in these traditional areas that we all share. And so there's some good tips on how to do just that. Or there's, often like volunteer programs through our environmental department for, digging up blackberries or doing restoration and all that's, it's on the website. So there's opportunities depending on what your level of interest or capability are. Or, hey, you can just go spend money at our casino. That actually supports the tribal members. That's actually how my job is funded, is through that. Or eighth generation, it's basically it's a clothing company that the tribe owns, and we bought it a couple of years ago. Some awesome native design, native created works, clothes, jewelry, accessories through there. So there's lots of different avenues that you can just support tribal businesses, whether it's Snoqualmie or not, any tribal business.
Well, I'll put in a plug. The Rockenbecks and Off the Bros visited the Longhouse down in Seattle recently, and there was a shop there with some, I thought, particularly lovely, just t-shirts and mugs and tea towels and things like that, and books that make great Christmas presents. So that's my plug for today here.
No, that's a good. And we work a lot with the Duwamish on a lot of different things, and yeah, they have a wonderful facility there. And yeah, I encourage anyone who has interest, and they have their traditional territory really goes from Seattle to kind of the west side of Lake Sammamish. So the Snoqualmie and Duwamish overlap quite a bit. Myself, I'm actually Snoqualmie, Duwamish, and Yakima. And a lot of Snoqualmie tribe members have similar connections to multiple tribes. But yeah, I know Duwamish is involved in a lot of restoration work on the Duwamish River, and the Snoqualmie is involved in restoration work all along the forks of the Snoqualmie River. So those are all good opportunities to learn more and to be part of something.
A recent purchase. My husband just brought me an audiovisual aid. Okay. We have so much about the restoration of the river areas. We had a talk on that last month, so I'm going to skip that right now. But there is one note in closing from Lynn Lambert, who is a member of our society, Steve, and she's also written the book on the famous wood carving sculptor Dudley Carter. And apparently she says that in 1954, the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission commissioned Redmond's Dudley Carter to create an interpretive center to commemorate and describe Old Man House, the largest Indigenous longhouse in Snoqualmie on Bainbridge Island. And she says the display is still maintained there. So perhaps I wouldn't count on it during COVID, but I think that's something for us to keep in mind as a nice outing someday. We have a lot more questions, but we know where to find you. You won't get away. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And Holly, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Margie. And Thank you, Stephen, and of course, Skyla, for a really informative talk today. I think we all enjoyed her cameos. And of course, thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. If you have additional questions or feedback on the presentation, feel free to write me at manager@redmondhistoricalsociety.org. And we did record today's program. I expect we'll have a recording available on our YouTube sometime early next week, and we will be emailing a link out to all of our registrants. I also tried to grab a few of those links that Margie and Stephen spoke about, so I'll be including a little resource guide with some additional reading as well. And then please join us again virtually on November 13th for Whiskey and Wiretaps, the Northwest's Running King, with lawyer, historian, and filmmaker Steve Edmonston. And don't forget to visit us at the Redmond Saturday Market on October 23rd. So until next time, everyone, take care.